I'm in the garden of a very nice house in Edinburgh that Markus Stitz has just moved into, and the pair of us, we have had a heck of a day. It's taken me a 3-hour journey, has taken me 6 hours to get down here because a tanker overturned on the A82. So obviously the tanker driver's having a worse day than I am. And Markus and I are going to go for a ride as soon as we can get a few more batteries for this recorder. But we're down here. If you know Markus, you'll have possibly heard the podcast I did with him. It was the very first podcast in this series, and if you haven't, please go back and listen to it because it's very good. And in that, he talks all about going around the world on a single speed. And this one is going to be slightly different focus because Markus has just produced we're just going out the gate now, has just produced a new book to all the gravel rides in the UK. Well, not all of them, but the selection of the best. And it is a good book. I like the idea of it, so we thought we'd go for a bike ride. Now, originally the plan had been to go for a bike ride around Aberfoyle, gravel foil as it's become known, and do one of the routes in the book. But because of my delay on the 82 and because his van wouldn't start, his rental van, the plan changed. So, to be honest, I'm not sure where we're going to end up because we're in the city of Edinburgh or just outside, and I'm in Markus's hands entirely. Can't believe in the middle of all this, you know, you're putting out a new book and you're moving house.
I know.
And you're trying to do some filming. Yeah. And you've got a day job.
Yeah, oh well, you know, I'm getting there, it's fine.
You know, if you want to get things done, ask a busy man, they say, don't they?
Multitasking. So, I wonder where we best. Let's go down here and then hop on this.
Because you don't really know exactly this area yet, do you?
Oh, I've been here.
Do you know the area? I mean, there's an area...
Yeah, I haven't. I live not far away from here.
Oh, right, okay.
And Mark's based in Trinity as well, so Mark Beaumont.
Right, so he's down... Oh, yeah, because you've ridden a lot with Mark, haven't you?
Yeah, we've done a lot of things together. So I was literally just yesterday at his place quickly and swapped him some new tyres and a book.
So do you like living in the city, Markus?
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Like, I was thinking whether I'm going to move out of Edinburgh because, you know, sometimes it would be nice to be wide on the hills as well. Yeah, I kind of decided for Edinburgh because it's just much easier for work stuff. Yeah. Like, my girlfriend lives in Norway now, so I'm frequently popping over to Oslo.
Oh, right.
So my carbon balance is rubbish. Don't tell anyone that.
It's fairly expensive all the way around.
The thing is, like, if I'm away for a few months and I need someone to live in my flat, then it's much easier to find someone in Edinburgh than if you're somewhere in the sticks. That's been the most deciding factor, to be honest with you.
So where are we going today? What's your plan? Given it was meant to be Aberfoyle.
Yes. So we're gonna head towards the coast, out towards Cremant. And just do some sneaky urban gravel paths, I would suggest. Like...
Urban gravel path?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds the antithesis to the sort of stuff I normally ride, so that sounds good.
Yeah, and I think it is also, like, although nothing of this is featured in the book, but that's kind of like what the book to a certain extent is about. Like, there's a nice mixture of big scenic national park routes, and then there's stuff around Milton Keynes, London, Newcastle. Yeah, especially the Newcastle, London and Milton Keynes route, they're kind of basically traversing a massive big city. I was quite conscious about that because that's where most of the people live. And I wanted to have something that they can just go out where they live.
It's a very good point. And also it gives you a reason to go to these places. And most of these places you can get to more easily by public transport.
Yeah.
Taking your bike on public transport, of course, can be a challenge, but there we are.
And Edinburgh is lovely because when I did all the stuff with Mark during lockdown, like, imagine two people who've cycled around the world, and we've been to some amazing places, and then all of a sudden being stuck in Edinburgh, and then we kind of thought, like, you know, we can take that as a challenge or take it as an opportunity or whatever. So we just started riding those paths here, and it was really nice.
I mean, it's quite interesting to me that we have, living in Scotland, although you're German, we have kind of like the 3 round the world record holders. I think you're a record holder, aren't you? Or are you just the first to do it on the single speed?
First to do it. I could have put a record in if I wanted to.
Actually, you have to be careful with this dog here.
Hello, dog.
It's odd that we have in Scotland Jenny Graham, fastest woman around the world, yep. Mark Beaumont, fastest man, or fastest human around the world on a bike, and you first single speed, even though you're German. I wonder why that is. Why is Scotland producing all these people who ride around the world?
I think it's got.
Just want to get away?
No, I think far away from that, because I think if you speak to Jenny and Mark, they absolutely love living here, and I think and the same in my case. I mean, I chose to live here, make this my home. Like, if you look at the training conditions, they're ideal in Scotland. You don't get extremes. You can pretty much ride all year round. Like, if I grew up in Germany, and it's really tough at times to ride in winter. It is doable. It's not impossible, and I think my perspective on winter riding has massively changed. You know, I used to be kind of saying, look, you know, why would you go out in the snow? And nowadays, I love riding in the snow. It's possibly one of the best times of the year you can ride a bike in winter. But I think Scotland's got hills, so you can get some decent climbs in while you're riding. You don't go anywhere like super high like you do in Kyrgyzstan, where you can really just ride 2 or 3 months a year. Like, if you want to ride a 4,500 meter mountain pass, that's just simply not doable in some months, like, unless you want to hike through the snow. So yeah, no, I think it's an awesome country to live.
Pulling the book together and all the routes, they aren't just your ideas of routes. You went out of your way so that each route is ascribed to another rider. Did they help you find them, and do you have a little bit of a say-so whether it was what you were looking for, so you had to fit it together as a cohesive whole? Yeah,
so like the first step was with the riders, because I wanted to have something that really reflects on...
Because you don't know the best thing in Milton Keynes, for example.
No, I had, like, in some cases I had no idea really. I think what I brought to those routes was a different perspective. So Milton Keynes is a good example. I discovered that the route in Milton Keynes actually goes past the place where Amazing Grace was written, which I found was quite interesting. And I think this is I think my perspective was more the visitor's perspective. The people who contributed, it was their local knowledge, their local trails. Like, they were the best ones to know where it's good to ride a bike.
Of course. So how did you pick those people? There's an awful lot of people who are sponsored by Kinesis, the same as you.
That was actually not a deciding factor.
Okay. I just happened to be that way. Okay, right, I'll believe you.
It possibly three criteria possibly. So I wanted to have an almost equal split between men and women. That was important for me, because I wanted this to be encouraging to more people than just the guidebooks I've seen. Like, I think we are a good example for the typical male that's normally featured on front of cycling magazines. I wanted to have something that goes a little bit further than that, so that's good for batteries here. Because
there's so many more people cycling now.
Oh yeah, totally. Like,
we're just seeing Tesco here. Now the battery on my audio recorder is running a little bit low, so I'm going to nip in here and see if I can get a couple of batteries to make it work. So
we could just
switch off
I'll
just
stay
for a
with
moment. You're gonna wait outside?
Yeah, totally.
I hope your ears are tuning in to the audio of us chatting while we ride. I realise there's noise from our free hubs and the people we pass on the cycleway, but I kind of hope that's part of the whole picture. If you'd like to see where we are and what we're doing, I made a video of our ride, and it's on the Always Another Adventure YouTube channel. And if you're enjoying this, there's a link to buy me a virtual coffee in the show notes and at alwaysanotheradventure.com. It's just a small donation to help cover the hosting costs for these podcasts and the travel. Oh, and of course the batteries.
Right, mine's on.
Brilliant.
Gosh, if only I could just recharge myself, like putting in fresh batteries sometimes. That'd be wonderful, wouldn't it? Are you happy with the book?
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, it's been an interesting process.
How long has it taken?
About a year, from start to finish.
Because there's an awful lot of words in it. You know what I mean? For a guidebook, I mean that. I don't mean that facetiously.
Yeah.
I mean that it's quite narratively rich.
Yeah.
I having written the guidebook myself, I know there's lots of different ways to do it, and they all go through your mind.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why you settled on that particular one, which is telling usually quite an involved story about the place. It's not just turn left at the third sheep or something, you know?
at the start of lockdown, I was like, oh, you know, I wonder if that's a good time to write a book. Because you know, if you can't go anywhere, I've got so much stuff on record, you know, and so but I had no idea about publishing. I had no contacts, and yeah, so it was basically starting from scratch. The initial idea was to do a bikepacking Scotland book, because that would have been the easiest one to write, because it's kind of half written already. And I said, oh no, we're just going to do bikepacking England, and we might have someone else doing that book, so we can't give you that right now.
Of course Ed Schute's got a Gravel of Scotland.
So yeah, and then Ed was working, and then I said, well, can I do about a book about gravel riding? And we're like, oh, we've got that as well. I was like, right. And I found out, I didn't know that Ed was doing it, but I found out a bit later, and I was like, that's brilliant, because he's done so much gravel riding as well. So I think he's a really knowledgeable person. So they kind of sent me Dave Barter's book, which is basically 25 road rides all across Britain, and they wanted something like this for gravel. And I thought, like, that's a good idea, but then I don't want to do a guidebook in the classic style, which is basically me riding 25 different routes with my face in it all the time. And I'll also struggle to find really good places. Like in Scotland, no problem. I know the south of England fairly well as well. But anything in between is going to be quite tricky to find really good stuff.
This is why you have got together with the other people.
And then I also think, well, the other thought is, like, I love writing features, I love portraying people. So that's where the idea came about. So why not portray people and ask them for their routes?
So you can write about their route and them.
Yeah, and I honestly think that people identify themselves with people. You know, there's a fair amount of people who possibly love what I'm doing, but they think it's too extreme, because the very moment when they look at what I've done, they're going to put me in the bracket of, like, extreme cyclists going really long distances. I think it's really difficult to say to them, look, I am enjoying the 20-kilometer ride, or even just the 5 kilometers pottering around town. Like, I don't need those long distances to be happy.
Good, I'm glad about that today,
Basically, I wanted a book which covers rides of very different lengths. So, you know, from the very short to the very extreme. Different genders, and also different skin colors and different ages as well. So coming up with a selection of people was not... I didn't make my life easy with that. So let's go this way.
Okay. Do you mean getting the people, or getting around all
getting
the people?
The people, and also getting them so, like, we can actually make it happen. You end up with a short list of people which could be interesting for the book, but then the reality sometimes is, like, I also had a busy schedule with other projects, GB Duro and a couple of other things, so I kind of had to work around that schedule. Try not having to go down south as a separate trip all the time.
Because you don't own a car and you try to travel as much as you can.
I travel
by
most of it by bike and train. Yeah, so loads of considerations. So it was basically a big spreadsheet of
times,
things.
places, people.
Times, places, people. How could this fit in? You know, how can it also? I mean, honestly, it's also quite financial things are playing in there as well.
Because there's not a huge amount of money in doing books.
Hard to say, to be honest with you, because it's not even published. But I'm not doing, like, I haven't done the book to, like, this is not my livelihood as such. You know, it would potentially be a nice top up, but it's not the core activity of what I'm doing. And I think, in a sense, that is a good thing, because it took the pressure off.
Yeah, it's a good contribution to the debate. Or to the sport.
I've done it because I was always fascinated by guidebooks which I had in New Zealand from the Kennett brothers, who have done an amazing job developing mountain biking in their country.
What was it like to see your name on the cover? Was it absolutely exciting? Oh, coming fast.
That is not legal. Yeah, it was really nice, actually. Especially, like, I think when we had... So that was kind of the final decision with the publisher, like, because initially...
I'll just go ahead, because the bike guy wants to get past.
Oh, it's busy, yeah?
What's all going on here?
It gets much quieter further down.
It gets busy on these Edinburgh cycleways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You go through and I'll drop behind you again. Right, you were saying it was a decision of the publisher.
I think the cover was one of those things where we had quite a bit of discussion over, like a good discussion, because initially they wanted me on the cover, and then I said, I've just written a book about 25 other people. I don't want myself on the front of a cover. Because I generally want the book to be about the book's about other people. Like, you know, there's my route is a small bonus route at the end, and I guess the introduction to the book is quite personal. But anything else, you know, is about the people I've portrayed. And then I thought, like, this needs to be reflected on the front cover. It's nice to have Dalila on the front. It's just a very welcome change to. Again, if I look at some cycling magazines and I look at the covers, they're pretty much more of the same all the time, you know, which is based on the fact that that's the readership of those magazines. Like, they're just playing to who's going to buy them. But I also think if you look at Rouleur, when they did the women's only issue, that was the fastest selling issue they ever did. So that tells us something about how much potential there is out there. I think it was just really nice to have two people from the book in there. Grant is from, and both of them are actually, interestingly enough, from two big cities, Milton Keynes and London.
How do you think people will use the book? Do you expect them to go around the country and try and tick them all off? Or is it just if they happen to be in that area and fancy a ride, oh, let's do that one?
Yeah, I think the latter one is the more realistic thing. You know, there will be people who possibly try to ride all of them, but that's a tiny percentage, I would suggest. Because, like, just traveling, when I travel myself, so traveling from the very far south of England up to the Northern Highlands is a long way.
Well,
you sometimes forget that you're in the same country.
I'm often down that way.
Yeah.
You see, I'll just pull ahead here, I have to go to Manchester next week.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I could stop on the way down in the Lake District and do that one out of Keswick.
Yeah. And that's kind of in a way how I think how most people will use the book.
Yeah.
It will possibly point them in the direction of, you know, I'm kind of that way anyway, I might as well give it a go. That's how I used the Kenneth Brothers book in New Zealand. When I used that guidebook, it brought me into places I wouldn't have chosen to go. And I think one thing which became very clear, and that was something I hadn't really thought about at all at the beginning, is lockdown was gravel time, because a gravel bike is the bike that people can ride from their front door and have a good time. Like, if you've got a full-size mountain bike, if you ride on a path like this, it's not much fun. It's a bit dull.
You'd say we're on an old railway line here.
Yeah.
It's one of the typical Sustrans routes. I don't know if it is a Sustrans route. It's well marked up, though.
Could be.
It's basically a shared use path, isn't it? There's an awful lot of people getting to and from places on their bikes, but also walking dogs, and we're dodging a lot of that sort of thing.
But then I think in the sense I think that's what the lockdown riding was like, and this is kind of the gravel bikes become that go-to lockdown bike for many people. Funnily, when I wrote up the chapters and looked at the interviews I did with the people, I was like, wow, half of the people mentioned that word, you know, and I wasn't sure, you know, I didn't want to mention it too often because it also brings out negative associations in most people. But on the other hand, you know, this is like, if you look at the gravel bike scene, that's given it a big push.
Why is it? Why do you think gravel bikes have taken off in the way they have? I've got some ideas, but I'd be interested to know what yours are.
I think general trend is to go off the road and not go on the road. People's perception of danger of riding on the road is quite high. I use perception. I never had any issues riding on the road, so there's a lot of people.
Perception of aggravation as well. They think they might be going to get shouted at.
Yeah, but then again, like, so far my experiences in the UK have been mostly positive. Based on my own opinion, I had much worse countries in the world to cycle on the road. Australia, for example. I think we lack infrastructure in this country. A lot is paths, trails that people can ride on, especially in Scotland. And even in England, there's plenty of bridleways and greenways that people can cycle on.
Yeah.
And you know, in a way, it's a natural fit.
So the reason is people wanting to get away from roads for whatever reasons, possibly a mix of reasons.
Yeah, I think the reasons will be a variety of things, and I think it also really depends on people's personal experience.
Got a real squeak on here.
That's you, huh?
Yeah, that's me. Well, that's my bike, yes.
I had that for a while, so
Yeah, I need to get that sorted. My apologies to anyone who's hearing that squeak on the audio and also hearing this noise occasionally. And that's because there's also a video of this ride, which you can see. There'll be a link in the show notes and on my YouTube channel at Always Another Adventure. So gravel bikes have actually changed in the time, well, that I've been riding them, certainly since you've been riding them, haven't they? They're becoming a slightly different sort of beast. They started off just as really cross bikes.
Yeah, and wider tires now, slightly different geometry as well, wider handlebars. Everything's getting wider, basically.
And most of us who ride them, I mean, I'm sure there's still some people who hold on to the belief that it's just a marketing gimmick, that it's just another way to sell another genre of bikes or sell more stuff.
Yeah.
Sell more gravel-related clothing, gravel-related bikes, gravel-related tyres, and the whole cycling industry going, yes, we've got a new niche.
Yeah, and that's always been the case, but that's been the case since the bike was invented. So,
well, that's true.
I think that's the nature of marketing more than the nature of bicycles.
Do you think it's carving out a reason to be in the UK, given that we don't really have the sort of gravel roads that they have in the US for which they were invented, but there again I suppose we don't have the mountains for which mountain bikes were invented.
Yeah, I think there's two types of gravel riding. You know, there's the gravel riding you would normally associate, like that's what, you know, with those bikes. And then there's the gravel riding that's always existed. And
you're gonna have to flesh that out a bit more.
So,
show you
like when I did some research, and I didn't really need to take research because it was quite obvious if you look at the Rough Stuff Fellowship and the old CCC stuff. Basically, if you look at people riding bikes in the 1920s, they wouldn't have been on tarmac roads. The majority of time they would have been on metal roads. I don't think they did care whether it would have been called gravel riding or not. That was cycling. That was the reality of cycling, having less tarmac and more metal roads.
And it was always popular with Wayfarer going around the country doing his talks.
Yeah, and then again when I lived in New Zealand back in the days in 2006, 2007, 2008, New Zealand had quite a large amount of roads that were still metal roads as well. So gravel roads, and access to the countryside is actually much more restricted. What I've been doing back then, which I basically called mountain biking, because possibly the term gravel riding doesn't exist, in its very nature was gravel riding, as it is sold to us these days. So, but I think there is also the bikes we're riding now, the gravel bikes. They are not just a marketing con. They are literally a great all-round bike which can do pretty much everything. So I think, in a way, actually, the gravel bike is a bit of an antidote to the cycling industry, who has for years and years told us you need at least 4 bikes to do cycling. Whereas with those bikes now, really, you can do most of the mountain biking, you can do pretty much all the gravel riding, you can ride on the road easily, you can ride on cycle paths, and you can go touring.
Well, this is what I was going to get to, actually, is that if it had been some sort of marketing gimmick to create a new genre of bike that people would want to have a road bike, a mountain bike, and in between a gravel bike, it has magnificently backfired, because now they just need, or just want, the one, which is that one that will do anything, and at most change the wheel set or something, if absolutely necessary.
Totally, this way. I just had so when I was cleaning my shed up, I have to get rid of bikes. I don't have the space for that many bikes. I had the luxury of having a massive...
Glad you know where we're going here. I'm sorry to interrupt. Blackhall Path. We've just done...
Yeah, so this is taking us out to the sea now.
This is a real kind of network of routes here, isn't
it's brilliant. It's this is...
Sorry, Marcus, I interrupted you.
No. So this is Edinburgh cycling. But then again, I was talking about perceived danger, and the same can be said for infrastructure. In the UK, in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is a great city. For me, it's a great city to cycle. I can get to the office pretty much exclusively on cycle paths.
Well, I think apart from that very short stretch where we left your house, we've been on... Are these all railway lines? They look like
some of them used to, and tram lines sometimes.
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, we've digressed. I do beg your pardon.
Yeah, no, but no, I think we in a way we haven't really digressed, because it's interesting, because I think so. The reason why I possibly like gravel bikes so much is that it is the closest it comes to the philosophy of my round the world single speed trip. You don't have to have a certain bike. You can take, like I took a mountain bike with mountain bike handlebars and one gear to cycle 34,000 kilometers around the world. Not as quick as you can do it. You can have a lot of fun on any kind of bike in any sort of environment. Like there's only a few environments where you really need a specialized bike. If you're doing a time trial, for example, you don't really stand a chance on a mountain bike. Or if you go downhill mountain biking, you won't have much fun on a road bike unless you're an absolutely amazingly skilled rider.
And in many ways, your round the world trip was the antithesis of Mark's, who had, what was it, 3 or 4 different bikes, all exactly the same, and a massive support team, whereas you and your single speed.
Yeah. But that's the joy of cycling, I think. There's so many people doing so many different things, and there's a space for everyone in that thing. No one really competes with anyone in that thing, because like everyone's kind of really special in their own personal way, and I think that's what I I am trying to get across with the book. Like people ride for so many different reasons, so many different places, so many different bikes. Just the variety of bikes that's featured in the book is quite interesting. I was quite clear that I didn't want to dictate to people to say you need to ride a gravel bike. You can ride any bike. We want to be doing a route that's doable on a gravel bike.
But the common thing was off-road, yeah?
Yeah. So the routes are kind of vetted by, is it doable on the bike as we are riding?
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead here.
There has been pretty much no occasion really where I had to change the route afterwards because it was too gnarly or whatever.
And the maps are very clear in the book, and there are also GPX files to download of those routes. Yeah.
And that's why the route descriptions are very different from the go left, go right, because I think that's the sort of job the GPS does these days.
Yes, you're not going to ride around with the book in one hand.
Very unlikely. You have to have some good skills to hold the book all the time.
Or even one of those sort of, what was it they used to call them, Trail Quest, little map boards out in front.
But then again, if people download the GPX and print their own map or whatsoever, that's brilliant as well. I also know people who could easily just look at the route on the screen, remember it, and then go out and ride it.
Well, that's not me.
It's like there's people who basically know a whole telephone book inside out and could repeat the numbers if they wanted to. That's kind of diminished now because there's no such thing as a telephone book these days. But
You mentioned earlier GB Duro.
Yeah.
Which, if folks don't know, there's a podcast you can find out much more about it with Josh Ibbott, because he won it a couple of years ago, the year they tried to ride it during the first year of lockdown, really.
Yeah.
And he had to carry everything. It's kind of like an off-road version of Land's End to John O'Groats, and it's an immense ride. And last year, which would be 2021, Mark Beaumont won it, and Marcus filmed not the whole thing, but filmed the race.
Yeah.
Or filmed it was Mark's Mark in the race. And I still can't quite get my head around this as someone who has filmed races. A, you did it by yourself.
Yeah.
And B, you did it using public transport.
Yeah.
Which, as I say, as a filmmaker, is kind of mind-blowing that you could do that.
Doing the logistics around the book was a good test ride for GB Duo.
Well, quite. I was just thinking, this is what I was getting to, is your logistics ability seems to be very impressive.
Yeah, I like that, and to some people, possibly it might sound a bit dull, whenever you talk about spreadsheets and whatever, planning things, people go like, oh, this is not really interesting or creative, and I actually quite like that task.
Oh, I do as well.
Because it's the counterpart to the creative stuff sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah, it was tricky at times, but it was doable.
So were you travelling by train and and your bike just travelling by train, getting your bike on the train's enough of a challenge usually.
Yeah.
And somehow you had to do that, but you're carrying your filming kit and all your camping kit and all your cycling kit.
Yeah, and then you also, trains were actually quite good because most of them have plug sockets now.
Oh, okay, so you
can use them you can use them as a mode of transport and also as a as a charging point. Yeah, it was. I mean, that project was quite intense. So Mark and I went into this because Shimano was supporting this, and they, at the beginning when we pitched the idea, they were like, "Can we not just hire a car and make it easy?" And I was like, "No."
I have to admit that would be my thought. We're actually on a road, and that really stands out. 39 minutes we've been riding.
And we were like, no, because we can do this in a hire car. It would possibly be the much more straightforward thing to do, but it's not in line with the ethos of the race.
Because it's a no-fly race.
Yeah, and I did it this way more or less because I want to get shots in the areas which are really remote, and you can't get that done with a car. You won't get in there. Like if you ride especially in Scotland, in the northern half of the race, all the good stuff is far away from a road.
And you won't want to necessarily come back to where your car was parked.
No.
You'd actually need a car and a driver.
Yeah, that would contradict the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I loved Lachlan Morton's film, but if you are a filmmaker, you know where the restrictions are, and you know why they used certain footage and not other footage, because they simply couldn't get to the places.
This being an off-road route, that makes that absolutely significant.
The special thing about GB Duo is that it does provide a really nice mix of some stunning scenery and some pretty straightforward riding. So it's not like the Highland Trail where you kind of like literally in stunning scenery all the time. I think that the joy of GB Duo, I sometimes felt like it had this really nice mix of being on the road and riding fast at times, and then at other times having the stunning scenery in Wales and Scotland or the south of England.
Oh, I hadn't realised there was that much on road actually with GB Duo.
Yeah, there's quite a chunk on the road actually.
That was good timing, bit of crossing.
I really like that combination, and what I loved as well, and that played into the decision to do it this way, is that riders were catching up on each other at various checkpoints. So if this would have been a race like the Highland Trail, where basically the fastest one is in the front, and then you've got the field stretched out about, 300 miles potentially. Logistically, that would have been almost impossible to film that. Whereas with GB Duo, I could literally film the race, follow the fastest rider into the checkpoint, and then come back.
Oh, and then follow the second fastest.
And follow the slower riders.
Yes.
And I would just have to make sure that I'm back at the checkpoint when everyone was setting up again. And I did that 4 times, basically. And it was just, and I think I was much more accepted.
That's very exhausting though.
But
you were more accepted by the racers because you were actually
I was looking like just another racer.
Riding the ride, yeah.
Like I wasn't looking like a film crew. I just happened to stop every now and then, put my drone up or my cameras out, and there was it.
Car back.
If you want to buy a bike, I would advise get a gravel bike because they can do so much.
Or maybe go into a couple of different local bike shops, because the temptation is to sell you the one that they've got in. So just get a feel from the advice.
Yeah, and then then on the other hand as well, if you really know your bikes really well, then often you'll possibly know better what you want for yourself. But for if you don't have much experience, I would suggest go to the bike shop first, then possibly do a bit of reading about that particular bike.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt getting a second opinion, as in any walks of life. At the moment, availability is an issue, so you possibly might not get what you want.
I know a few people have tried to get gravel bikes in 2021 and have given up and just bought mountain bikes.
Yeah. So, but I think the situation is getting a little bit more relaxed these days again.
Hopefully.
But just simply, I think in the current climate, be prepared to have to pay a little bit more if you want to get a bike. You know, you like the better value for money, I think, the lower the availability. Like,
oh right, the more expensive bikes, you can get. It's become quite a resource now, hasn't it, bikepacking Scotland?
Like when bikepacking, I don't know, I don't even know when bikepacking started, you know. I don't think it started in 2014 or 2013, you know, it's a long time before that. You know, when those bags came on the market, people were like, who needs this, you know, what, and look at it now.
Yeah. Well, it's just a saddlebag turned long ways, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I think in a nutshell, that was when I started, or when I had the idea of doing bikepacking Scotland. I was kind of looking at how can I make this, you know, my income, my living, to a certain extent, because I didn't want to have a full-time job and then do all of that on top, because I'd realized before the round the world trip, this is way too much. There's only so many hours in a day you have, and it was very tricky at the beginning, because you start from scratch, there's no experience, there's no one you can talk to. But then I think as long as you believe in something, and in a sense that's the same with the book. When I started the book, I was just like, what did I get myself into here? There's a lot of stuff to produce. The logistics, getting all the footage, all the writing in. I think this is where the round the world trip is so utterly useful with any of the stuff I'm doing right now, because on the round the world trip I had this massive task. And I knew I'd only be able to do that task if I break it down into sizable chunks. Kind of approach those things as different things and then move on and progress. Like, it's a progressive journey. And since then, I pretty much approached everything in my life like this.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's how you eat an elephant, isn't it? One mouthful at a time.
Yeah.
What plans do you have for gravel riding, bike packing? Where are you looking next?
There might be another book.
Okay.
So that's the plan for the...
You enjoyed this one that much?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the process, and so that's part of the plan. So I think this
Can you tell me what it is?
Oh, it's going to be about bikepacking, and possibly, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to put two and two together. It's about bikepacking in Scotland. So,
as the man who runs the website Bikepacking Scotland,
it kind of makes sense.
Too much of this, right? Yeah.
I normally do at least one race a year, and I haven't done anything this year. So if I can do something short, I'd be really keen to do something, or either a race or a trip which is not book writing, filming, whatever, which is just simply on the bike and enjoying that. So yeah, so this year it's going to be a bit more about local and regional stuff, and then I think coming next year I'm kind of looking to get back to some more international stuff. A big dream at the moment is to do something in winter. I love winter riding, I love the extremes, and I'd love to spend a few days over winter to get some really nice riding in. So I think this is like, if you look at the bigger scale projects, that will be that.
Well, I enjoyed the book, Marcus. Wish you every success with it. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, then you might want to think about giving us a small micropayment. There's a link at alwaysanotheradventure.com. Just buy me a virtual coffee. That would be absolutely wonderful. And there's also a video that goes with this ride, and you can find that on the YouTube channel, Always Another Adventure. My huge thanks to Marcus for his time. I've been Simon Willis, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.